Hello world! I wasn't expecting to have an update video so quickly on my little 7¼ inch gauge railway, but lo and behold, I already have enough content that I'm comfortable in uploading another video. So, let's talk about it. I was at the store looking at various sheds. My current shed is okay for storing a lawnmower and some rakes and things like that, but it's no good for being an actual workshop or a place where I can store my tools reliably. So I need an upgrade. I was thinking about my little railway project, and it would be wonderful if I could have a shed that also served my needs at storing my narrow gauge locomotives, when I eventually get them. This little blue shed is what caught my eye. At the price of $6,000, it's somewhat affordable. I think I could possibly finance it, or perhaps just buy it outright if I save up, and put it on my property. The thing that makes me so eager about purchasing this shed is that it has a separate place for me to store my tools, and then a spot for me to store my locomotives, and it looks like a reasonable berth to be an engine shed, which fits the theme of what I like around my house. I kept looking at sheds for a little while longer, and nothing else really caught my eye. The reason I want a new shed so badly is that it would make working outside a whole lot easier if I wasn't always standing in the sunlight. That, and I need a proper place to actually store my tools, and I need to stop keeping them inside my own home. Inevitably though, my limited budget meant that I had to put sheds out of my mind for now and focus on something else. I decided to walk inside the place that was selling the sheds in the hopes I could find something I could use for a railway wheel. It's important I scout out with my various options before actually diving in. The only thing I can ever find inside of these hardware stores are double-flanged rolling wheels that are usually for like rope or belts, but their shoddy craftsmanship and how they're designed means that I can't remove one of the flanges, and even if I were to use them in their double flange state, it would be one bumpy ride as I roll over those various weld marks inside the flange. I just can't think of what would be a good wheel right now, but I suppose I have plenty of time to work it out. The rails aren't done yet, and I have a lot to tackle. On my way back from my little research outing, what did I so happen to see but a free wood pile? And in that pile were several railroad ties that someone was getting rid of. I suppose they were too rotten for them or something, or perhaps they just no longer had a need for them, but either way, I was accepting of 4 perfectly good railroad ties. Those railroad ties give me the perfect excuse to go ahead and use today to tackle the rock pile. The rock pile's not a project I was looking forward to doing, but I knew it needed to be done, so I might as well start it now. When handling this old pile of rocks, I try to keep my eyes peeled for snakes. I'd hate to squish any of them in between the rocks as I move them, or have them rear up and bite me. I know they're not venomous, but that doesn't mean I want more marks on my legs. When I first purchased this property, the backyard was overgrown, but also buried in snow. So things like the waste heap in the very back and this rock pile here went a little bit unnoticed. At first, I believed this rock pile to be possibly the cap of a cistern, but that big rock I moved just there proved otherwise. Turns out this was just a rock pile that someone had left half buried in the ground, and I don't really know why, but there's nothing underneath it, nothing I need to worry about. So, the project will continue, and those railroad ties are going to be used to level out the grade between the top of the rock pile and the bottom of the rock pile down in the end of my yard. Now I see why I didn't find any snakes inside of that pile. There is an entire crazy ant nest inside of that rock heap, and let me tell you, they are getting all over me. After I dealt with the ants and gave them a minute or two to go ahead and disperse out of the rock pile a little bit, I went ahead and grabbed a ratchet strap for moving the railroad ties. The reason I use a ratchet strap for this is because I don't want to throw out my back, and it's better to keep a straight back when moving something so heavy like a railroad tie. My method for moving railroad ties so far has never failed me. Hook the strap onto the tie, and then go ahead and give it a hard pull with your back perfectly straight. That way you don't injure yourself, and the tie will move eventually. Even if it just moves slightly, it will move. As long as we're watching me move railroad ties, I might as well tell you my plan for these railroad ties. The idea is that they're going to be along each side of the track with the rock pile, or at least what's left of it, in between them, dirt, then hopefully the railroad ties, and gravel to lock it all in place. I'm hoping that this will make the gradient between the bottom of my yard and the top of my yard, here where my house level is, a little bit smoother, because right now it's too jarring a sudden drop. I also had to dig quite a bit to make certain that the railroad ties would actually sit level with the other tie. I figured if I can get them to look somewhat nice, I might as well do it. So I'm digging in order to build my way up, if that makes any sense. But I'm hoping the end result will be something worth looking at. After moving the railroad ties in place the way I wanted them, and checking the gradient to make sure it was as smooth as possible, I went ahead and picked up all the large stones from the rock pile, and I threw them in. I figure these large pieces of stone will make a good bed for the dirt to sit on and really lock everything in place. Hopefully nothing will move, not even the railroad ties, but I can always put spikes on the other sides of all of them to make certain that nothing moves. I'm also hoping that these stones will decrease the cost of fill dirt that I'll need to make this whole thing work. I'm also using one of my railroad ties to check the gauge between the actual railroad ties I'm putting down. I want to make sure the ties don't actually make any contact with the supporting ties on the outside of the dirt. After all, I want the train to go down a level gradient smoothly, not suddenly. As long as we're on the topic of my little homemade railroad ties, someone commented on the last video that I wasn't using the right kind of lumber for my railroad ties. I've been using deck-ready treated lumber, whereas I should be using lumber that is suitable for ground contact and has absorbed more of the stabilizing chemicals that prevent the wood from rotting. That's useful, and I'll have to go for it next time I'm buying lumber for my railroad track. I'm not certain how much it'll increase the cost, but if it increases the lifespan, it's worth it. A lot of the pieces of stone and the concrete and various other things in the rock heap didn't quite fit in perfectly. They were too sharp and angular and pointed up above the railroad ties. So they had to be smashed into smaller pieces with a sledgehammer, which is a job I enjoy doing. After that, I used a rake to get all the leaves and various pieces of small stone and pretty much everything that was left inside of the rock heap, and I raked it inside between the ties. This should help lower the cost of stabilizing dirt that I throw in between it, and it'll just be a good way of cleaning up my yard. The entire place is kind of a dirty mess, and I'm glad to get it cleaned up. In addition to the rock heap, you might also be aware of the stump. I keep this stump underneath a tarp in the hopes that the tarp will maintain a high moisture level within it. I tried drying out a stump and burning it before, and let me tell you, I regretted it every step of the way, as no matter what I did, the wood just kept getting harder and tougher. This time, I realized that sunlight was my issue. Don't let the stump be exposed to sunlight, keep it under a tarp, in darkness. Sometimes I go out and pour some water on it if it's a really dry and hot day. That way the moisture helps the various little critters that are eating the wood just eat the wood. As you can see from this video, my drill bit is going right into this stump with no resistance or problem. It has to drill a bit on the sides of the stump that are much drier, but within the middle, it dives right in, no problem. This stump is almost ready to be removed, but I'm going to give it another few weeks, and I'm likely going to break it apart with a pickaxe after that. I hit some hard parts, and I think that can be solved with just some more water on a weekly basis, or maybe on a daily basis if I want to be really quick about it, and then being under a tarp. If you have a stump at home, I heavily suggest this method, especially if you're not into spending money just to get rid of something in your yard. After all of that, the holes are seeping in water, and I'm putting the tarp back on so the stump can continue to rot. I'll be paying this stump a visit again in a couple of weeks, except next time I'll be bringing an axe. And that's it for this video. I was really nervous about uploading the first video, but let me tell you, I have received nothing but support and helpful comments and people just approving of what I'm doing. And I'm really hoping I can eventually come up with something that works as a 7¼ inch gauge railway. I've decided that the Patreon is not happening. It just makes me way too nervous to accept money from strangers, and I don't really have anything to promise it other than that I'll receive a little railway in my backyard, so at this stage I'm not accepting donations because I just don't know how to do it and I just don't feel comfortable doing it. So, for this video, I'm going to be saying bye-bye!